She didn't cry. That was the part nobody expected. Emily Carter stood in the middle of the main street with dust on her dress and every eye in town cutting into her like a blade. And she didn't cry. Not when Tobias McKenna said the words loud enough for the whole street to hear. Not when the women turned away. Not when the men smirked. She just stood there, chin up, hands still. And then a door opened across the street. And everything changed. If this story moved you, please subscribe to our channel and hit that bell so you never miss a new story. Drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. The stagecoach pulled into Dry Creek at noon on the hottest day of the summer, and nobody was paying it much attention until they saw who stepped off. Emily Carter came down those wooden steps like she was trying not to fall. One hand gripping the iron rail, the other pressed flat against her skirt to keep it from lifting in the dry mountain wind. She had a single trunk, a brown travel bag with a broken buckle, and a face that had been holding itself together for the better part of 3 days on the road. She'd told herself she wasn't nervous. She told herself that the whole way from Millbrook across 2 mountain passes through a night stop at a way station that smelled like old hay and unwashed men through the long silent morning where the mountains grew bigger and the sky pressed down lower. She'd sat with her hands folded in her lap and told herself, he's a decent man. The arrangement is fair. You've done harder things than this. She believed it right up until she stepped off the coach and heard her name called from across the street. Miss Carter? Not a question, not a greeting, an identification. The way you'd call out a parcel at a post office window. Tobias McKenna was standing on the boardwalk outside Hale's General Store with 3 other men she didn't know, and he was looking at her the way a man looks at livestock. He's considering returning to the cellar. He was thick through the shoulders, well-dressed for a frontier town, hair oiled back under a good hat. He had the kind of face that probably looked pleasant when things were going the way he wanted them to go. Things were not going the way he wanted them to go. He stepped down off the boardwalk, didn't offer his hand, didn't tip his hat, just walked to within 6 feet of her and stopped. His eyes went from her face to her trunk, to her bag, and back to her face. You're smaller than they described, he said. Emily kept her hands still. I wasn't aware I was being described. How old are you? 24. The letter said 22. The letter, Emily said carefully, was written by my uncle, who is not always precise. Tobias looked at her for another long moment. Then he turned his head and said something to the man nearest him, something low, something she couldn't hear over the wind and the sound of the horses shifting in their traces. The man beside him laughed short, dismissive, the kind of laugh that has nothing to do with anything being funny. By now, people had started to notice. That was the thing about a town like Dry Creek. It wasn't big enough for anything to happen privately. The women outside the dressmaker's shop had gone quiet. 2 men leaning against the post outside the saloon had straightened up. A group of children near the water trough had stopped their game and were watching with wide eyes and open mouths. Tobias McKenna turned back to Emily and said loudly, loudly, clearly, intending the whole street to hear, "This is not the woman I agreed to take." The silence that followed was the loudest thing Emily had ever heard. She felt it land on her like a physical weight, felt the eyes come in from every direction, felt the particular scalding humiliation of being evaluated and found lacking in front of a crowd of strangers who would remember this for years. Who would tell the story at their supper tables? Who would shake their heads and say that poor woman came all that way turned away right there in the street? She didn't cry. She hadn't cried since her mother's funeral 3 years ago, and she wasn't going to start now in the dirt of a town she'd never wanted to come to in front of a man whose name she'd only known for 6 weeks. She said, "I beg your pardon. You heard me." Tobias was already turning away, already half done with her. His attention drifting to the men around him, the way a man's attention drifts when the matter he's dealing with is too minor to hold. The arrangement was made under false representations. I won't be held to it. The arrangement, Emily said, and her voice was steady, she made sure of that, was made in good faith. By whom? He looked back at her with something close to amusement. Your uncle sent a letter describing a school teacher 22 years old, capable of managing a household. What he sent me, he gestured at her with one hand, a short dismissive wave, is a woman who looks like she might blow away in the first wind. Someone in the crowd laughed. Emily didn't look to find out who. Her trunk sat in the dirt behind her. The stagecoach driver was already lifting down the next passenger's bags, already moving on, already done with her. The next coach back east didn't leave until Thursday. It was Monday. She had $4.30 in her travel bag. She had no family within 300 miles. She had a broken buckle on her bag and dust in her hair and a heartbeat that was going faster than she was letting anyone see. Mr. McKenna, she said, I have traveled 9 days. I have honored the terms of this arrangement in every particular. Whatever misunderstanding exists between you and my uncle, I would ask that it be resolved privately and that you not. There's nothing to resolve. He picked up his hat, adjusted it, looked past her at the stagecoach driver. Johnson, is there room for a return passenger Thursday? The driver glanced at Emily. Something moved in his expression, not quite sympathy, not quite discomfort. Reckon so. Good. Tobias looked at Emily once more, a final sweeping look that made her feel like a piece of furniture being estimated for resale. I'll pay for the return fare. That's more than fair given the circumstances. Given the circumstances, Emily repeated. You can stay at the boarding house. Tell Ruth I'll cover 2 nights. He was walking away. He was actually walking away, back to his men, back to his conversation, back to whatever his afternoon had been before the stagecoach arrived and complicated it. As if she were a problem he'd solved. As if 9 days of travel and 6 weeks of letters and a life turned upside down were simply a minor administrative inconvenience now handled. Emily stood in the street with her trunk in the dirt and the whole town watching and absolutely nowhere to go. And then she heard boots. Not quick, not urgent, just deliberate. The kind of stride that belongs to a man who knows exactly where he's going and has decided that's where he's going, and that's the end of the discussion. She turned. The man came from across the street from the direction of the lumber yard. He was taller than Tobias by several inches broader through the chest, with the kind of build that comes from actual work, rather than the appearance of it. He had dark hair, a hat that had seen considerable weather, and a jaw that looked like it had been cut from the same granite as the mountains behind him. His shirt was rolled at the sleeves. There was sawdust on his boots. He wasn't looking at Emily. He was looking at Tobias McKenna. He walked until he was standing in the space between them, not in front of Emily, not blocking her, just between, and he stopped. And then he said in a voice that wasn't raised, that didn't need to be raised, "You done talking about her like she's a shipment?" Tobias turned slowly. The amusement was gone from his face. "Morgan," he said. "A warning, a reminder of something." "McKenna." The man called Morgan didn't move. "Answer the question." "This is none of your business." "You made it the street's business when you said it loud enough for every person in Dry Creek to hear." Morgan tilted his head just slightly. "So I'm asking again. You done?" The silence stretched. Emily looked between them at Tobias, whose jaw had tightened, whose shoulders had shifted into something defensive, without his seeming to realize it, and at this stranger who had walked into the middle of a situation that had nothing to do with him and was standing there as if he owned the ground beneath his feet. Tobias said, "The woman and I had a legal arrangement that is no longer—" "I'm not talking about the arrangement." Morgan's voice was still level, still quiet. "I'm talking about how you just spoke to her, in front of this town, like she isn't standing right there." He paused. "Like she isn't a person. Morgan, I'd suggest you mind. She traveled 9 days. Morgan wasn't raising his voice. He didn't have to. The street was so quiet that every word landed like a stone in still water. 9 days on a coach through the mountains, in the middle of summer. She got off that coach and you couldn't give her 10 minutes before you started talking about her like she wasn't there." He looked at Tobias for a moment longer, then said, "That's not how you treat a lady." Tobias's face had gone somewhere cold. You don't know anything about this situation. I know what I saw. Then you saw a business arrangement that didn't work out. It happens. There's no need to. Business arrangement. Morgan said it like he was turning the words over, looking at the underside of them. Then he looked at Emily for the first time. Really looked, not the way Tobias had looked, not assessing, not measuring, just meeting her eyes. "Ma'am," he said, "I'm Caleb Morgan. I apologize that your first 10 minutes in Dry Creek looked like this." Emily opened her mouth, closed it. She wasn't sure what she'd been expecting, but it wasn't that. She stopped, started again. "Emily Carter." He nodded. Then he looked back at Tobias. "She's going to need somewhere to stay." Tobias's eyes narrowed. "I already said I'd cover the boarding house." "Ruth's boarding house is full." This came from a woman standing on the boardwalk, older, gray-haired, with her arms folded and her expression unreadable. "Has been since Friday. The mining survey team's got all 4 rooms." Tobias looked at the woman, then back at Morgan, and Emily could see the calculation happening behind his eyes, the weighing of how this looked, how much it cost him, what the simplest exit was. "Then she can—" He stopped, started again. "There's the old Finch place. Roof caved in January," the gray-haired woman said. She didn't sound like she was enjoying this. She sounded like she was reporting facts. Another pause, longer this time. Tobias looked at Emily with the expression of a man encountering an inconvenience that keeps expanding. "Well," he said, "that's hardly my problem." "Tobias." Morgan's voice was still quiet, but something had shifted in it. "Walk away if you need to, but don't tell me it's not your problem." "It isn't." "You brought her here." "I did not bring her anywhere. She came. There's a difference. The letters came from your name." Morgan was quiet for a moment. "You want to stand here and split that hair in front of all these people, go ahead. But she's still standing in the street." Tobias looked at Emily one final time. His jaw worked. Then he said to no one in particular, "This is not my responsibility," and walked away. His men followed. His boots hit the boardwalk, and then the door to Hale's closed behind him, and that was that. Emily looked at her trunk in the dirt. She looked at the street around her, at the people who were still watching, some with sympathy, some with curiosity, some with the glazed look of people witnessing something they'd already started turning into a story. She looked at the mountains at the end of the road, enormous and pale in the summer heat pressing against the sky. She said to Morgan without looking at him, "You didn't have to do that. I know. You've made an enemy. Tobias McKenna's been an enemy of mine since 1879. This just gave him a new reason." Emily looked at him then. He was watching the door Tobias had gone through with the calm expression of a man who'd said everything he'd meant to say and was done with the subject. "What happens now?" she asked. Caleb Morgan looked at her trunk, then at her bag, then at the sky, which was beginning to shift toward afternoon, the sun starting its long, slow slide toward the western peaks. "You got anywhere to be tonight?" "No." "You eat today?" She thought about the half biscuit at the way station this morning. "Not to speak of." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I got a cabin up on the north slope. Got a spare room. It's not much. The roof leaks in one spot when it rains, but it ain't rained in 3 weeks, so." He picked up her trunk, just reached down and picked it up, settled it under one arm like it weighed nothing. "You can stay until you figure out what comes next." Emily stared at him. "Mr. Morgan." "Caleb." "Caleb." She stopped. There were 100 things she should have said. Practical things. Proper things. Things about how she couldn't impose on a stranger, couldn't go to a strange man's property, couldn't let this situation become something else it wasn't. She knew all those things. She believed in all those things. "I don't know you." "No, you don't." "We've spoken for 4 minutes." "About right." "You're offering me a room based on 4 minutes." He looked at her. "I'm offering you a room based on what I saw out here. You can take it, or you can figure out something else." He glanced down the road. "Town's about out of options." Emily looked at the road. She looked at the boarding house with its sign full. She looked at where Tobias's men were still lingering near the saloon watching. She looked at her $4.30 and her broken bag and the sun that was going to be gone in 4 hours. She looked at Caleb Morgan, who was holding her trunk and waiting with the patience of a man who had learned to wait a long time ago, who wasn't pushing and wasn't persuading and was just simply there. "All right," she said. He nodded, started walking. She picked up her bag and followed. Behind them, Dry Creek watched them go and started talking before they'd cleared the end of the street. The north slope was 40 minutes on horseback, and 15 minutes of that was straight up. Emily hadn't ridden much in the past 3 years. City life teaching life. The particular kind of life that keeps a woman indoors with chalk dust on her hands. And by the time the trail leveled out, she was holding the saddle horn with both hands and pretending she wasn't. Caleb rode ahead without looking back. Not rudely, just with the easy certainty of a man who knew every rock on this trail and knew she'd make it because the horse would see to it. He'd given her the steadier animal she'd noticed, the brown mare with the easy gait. He'd taken the gray, which was younger and kept wanting to move faster than the trail allowed. She watched his back as they rode, the way he moved with the horse instead of against it, the sawdust still on his boots. The way his hat sat, not the careful, deliberate way Tobias wore his hat adjusted for impression, but the way a man wears something he stopped thinking about. He hadn't said anything since they left the livery. She hadn't either. There was something almost restful about it. She'd been around so many words in the past weeks, her uncle's careful letters, Tobias's cold assessment, the other passengers on the coach who'd wanted to know where she was going and why. And was she excited? Wasn't she? Lucky? Isn't it romantic that the silence felt like something she could breathe in? The cabin came into view around a stand of pine trees, and Emily's first honest impression was smaller than she'd expected, and more real. It wasn't ruins, and it wasn't a palace. It was a structure that had been built by someone who knew what they were doing, maintained by someone who kept up with the important things and let the rest go. The wood was weathered but solid. The porch held the weight of 2 chairs that had clearly been sat in a great deal. There was a stack of split logs near the door that reached Emily's shoulder. Caleb swung down from the horse and took her mare's reins before she'd gotten her foot out of the stirrup. "Careful," he said. "Second step's loose." He meant the porch steps. She noted it. Inside was clean in the way that a place is clean when one person lives in it, and that person doesn't accumulate things they don't need. A table, 2 chairs, a wood stove, a shelf with a few books and some tools, and a tin of something that might have been coffee. A second door closed, which presumably led to the room he'd mentioned. He set her trunk down near the door, took off his hat, hung it on a peg. "Kitchen's there," he said, nodding at the stove and the small work area beside it. "Water from the pump outside. Wood's out front. I'll bring more in before dark." He moved toward the closed door. "This is yours." He opened it. A room, small but real, a bed with a wool blanket, a window with a clear view of the mountains, a hook on the wall for hanging things. "It's been aired out," he said. "I wasn't using it." Emily stood in the doorway and looked at the room. She thought about the boarding house she'd been going to have, the one Tobias had arranged, the one she'd imagined as a temporary stop on the way to a new life. She thought about the new life she'd imagined. The arrangement. The possibility. She thought about standing in the street with the whole town watching and nowhere to go. "Thank you," she said. He nodded. "I'll start supper. You probably want to wash up." She turned. "I can cook. You don't have to." "I know I don't have to." She met his eyes. "I'd like to do something useful." He looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "There's salt pork in the tin over the stove, some cornmeal, dried beans that have been soaking since yesterday." He moved to the door. "I'll see to the horses." He went out. She heard the porch step creak, not the second one, which was loose. He avoided it automatically without thought. Emily stood alone in the cabin. Outside the window, The mountains stood where they'd stood for 1,000 years, enormous and indifferent, and somehow, in this moment, more comforting than anything else she could see. She found the salt pork. She found the cornmeal. She put water on to boil and started the fire in the stove with the patience she'd learned from years of cold classroom mornings. And she told herself the same thing. She'd told herself on the coach, "You've done harder things than this." Except this time, for the first time in several weeks, she almost believed it. Kid. Supper was salt pork and cornbread, and the beans which hadn't finished soaking, but were edible enough if you were hungry. And Emily was hungry, and so was Caleb. And neither of them talked much, but it wasn't the silence of two strangers afraid of each other. It was more like the silence of two people who'd already used up the necessary words and were letting things settle. He ate everything she put in front of him, didn't comment on the beans, said thank you when she refilled his cup with water. After supper he said, "Long day." "Yes." "You should sleep." "I will." She was washing the plates when he said from the doorway, "What are you going to do?" She stopped. "I'm sorry." "Next, what's next?" He wasn't being pointed about it, just asking, the way you ask a practical question. "You got family east." "A cousin in Ohio. We're not close." "Money." She thought about $4.30. "Enough for the coach fare back. Not much more." "You want to go back?" She thought about Millbrook, the school that had replaced her with a younger woman when she'd left no question asked. Her uncle's house where she'd been a dependent and a burden in equal measure. The particular shame of returning to a place as the woman the frontier arrangement didn't want. "No," she said. "Then you've got some time to figure something else out." He said it simply, like it wasn't a complicated thing, like time was just a resource you had or you didn't. "No rush on that. Stay till you know." She looked at him. "You don't know anything about me. You cooked supper. You didn't cry in the street when you had every reason to." He leaned against the doorframe. "That's enough for now." Emily looked back at the plate she was washing. Something moved in her chest. Not quite relief, not quite the particular ache of being seen, but something adjacent to both. "The roof leaks," she said. "One spot, far corner of the main room, when it rains." "It hasn't rained in 3 weeks." "No." She finished the plate, set it aside. "Good night, Mr. Morgan." "Caleb." "Good night, Caleb." She went to her room, closed the door, sat on the edge of the bed and let out a breath she'd been holding since noon. Outside the window, the mountains were going dark, the peaks catching the last of the light, while the valleys filled with shadow. Somewhere in the trees below, something moved a branch, an animal, the mountains settling into night. Emily Carter lay back on the bed with her boots still on, stared at the ceiling of a stranger's cabin on the north slope of a mountain she didn't know in a territory she'd barely heard of 3 months ago. She thought, I don't know what comes next. And then for the first time in a very long time, that thought didn't frighten her. She was up before dawn, not because she'd slept well, she hadn't. Not really. The unfamiliar sounds of the mountain kept pulling her back from the edge of sleep. The wind in the pine trees, something moving on the roof. The particular silence between sounds that was nothing like the silence in a town. But because lying still stopped feeling useful somewhere around 4 in the morning, and Emily Carter had never been good at useless things. She found the wood stove. She found the coffee tin. It was coffee ground coarse the way people made it out here when they weren't trying to impress anyone. She found a pot. She had a fire going before the sky outside the window had moved from black to gray. She heard him when the sky was gray going to blue. Not an alarm, not a dramatic waking, just the sound of boots on the floor. The door to his room, a pause that she recognized as a man registering something unexpected. Then footsteps to the doorway of the kitchen. Caleb Morgan stood in the doorway with his hair uncombed and his boots unlaced, and looked at the fire in the stove and the coffee on, and Emily standing at the window watching the mountains come out of the dark. He said, "You didn't have to do that." "I was up," she said. He was quiet for a moment. Then he crossed to the stove, poured himself a cup, and went to the table and sat down and started lacing his boots. No ceremony, no commentary, just a man starting his day. She poured her own cup and sat across from him. They drank coffee in the early light and didn't talk, and it was the most natural thing that had happened to Emily in months. After a while he said, "I'm going up to check the north fence line today. Take most of the morning." "All right. There's flour in the second tin. Eggs from the coop out back. You don't have to cook anything, there's dried meat on the shelf. I'll figure something out." He looked at her over the rim of his cup. "You always up this early?" "When I have reason to be." "What's your reason today?" She thought about it honestly. "Didn't see the point in pretending I was asleep." Something shifted at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile, but the territory adjacent to one. He finished his coffee, set the cup down, stood up, took his hat off the peg, settled it on his head with the same unconscious ease as the day before. "I'll be back by noon," he said. Then he was gone. The porch step, the solid one, creaked under his weight. Then the sound of the horses. Then nothing but wind and the coffee cooling in her hands. Emily looked around the cabin in the full morning light and thought, "All right, then this is what you do now." She found the eggs. She found the flour. She found a crack in the back wall of the kitchen that needed filling before winter, and a shelf that had come loose from its bracket, and a window that stuck when you tried to open it because the wood had swelled in the summer heat. She noted all of it the way she'd learned to note things not as problems, but as a list. Things to work through. One at a time. She ate, she washed her dishes. She went outside and stood on the porch in the full heat of the morning sun and looked at the land around her, the trees, the slope dropping away into the valley. Dry Creek just visible as a smear of smoke and rooftops far below. And she thought about what Caleb had said the night before. Stay till you know. She didn't know yet, but she was still here. That counted for something. She was pulling weeds from what had once been a kitchen garden beside the cabin. Someone had started it and let it go. The kind of thing that happens when one person is managing too much. When she heard the horse coming back down the trail. Too early for noon. She straightened. Caleb came into the yard at a pace that was not quite urgent, but wasn't casual either. He swung down before the horse had fully stopped. "You got a visitor," he said. "About 15 minutes behind me." Emily's hands went still on the weeds. Tobias. His man, Hector Webb. He looped the horse's reins over the fence post. Tobias sends Webb when he doesn't want to show up himself. Means he wants information more than he wants a confrontation. What kind of information? Whether you're here, whether you're... He paused, choosing. A problem. Emily dropped the weeds, brushed her hands on her skirt. What do I do? Caleb looked at her steadily. What do you want to do? I want to not be anyone's problem. That's not an answer to the question I asked. She looked at him. He was watching her with that calm level attention. She was already starting to recognize the look of a man who had long since stopped pretending that difficult things were simple, who waited for you to stop pretending too. I don't want to hide, she said. I won't hide. Good. He went to the porch and sat on the step, the solid one, and took out a short piece of rope from his pocket and started working a knot into it with the practiced absent motion of someone who needs something to do with his hands while he waits. Then we just wait. She sat in the other chair on the porch, the one that looked out at the trail. Hector Webb arrived in 12 minutes. He was a slight man on a dark horse with careful eyes and a smile that didn't reach anywhere near them. He took in the porch, Caleb, Emily, the order of the yard, all in one sweeping glance that looked casual and wasn't. Morgan, he said from horseback. Didn't expect to find you here. Webb. Caleb didn't look up from the rope. You rode up my mountain on a Tuesday morning. What do you need? Mr. McKenna wanted to make sure Miss Carter had somewhere comfortable to stay. Webb's eyes moved to Emily, and that she had everything she needed. She does, Caleb said. He wanted to hear that from her directly. Emily said, I'm comfortable, thank you. Webb smiled his careful smile. He also wanted to let you know, Miss Carter, that the offer to cover the return fare still stands. Coach leaves Thursday. He'd make sure you were on it safely. That's kind of him, Emily said. Tell him I appreciate the thought. Does that mean you're planning to take the Thursday coach? Pause. She felt Caleb go very still, though he didn't look up, didn't stop working the rope. It means I appreciate the thought, Emily said. I'll make my own arrangements. Webb's smile held. He looked at Caleb. Morgan, this is a complicated situation you've walked into. Don't seem that complicated to me. A woman alone at your cabin. A guest, Caleb said, and now he did look up. At my property, on my land, which, if I recall, Tobias has been trying to get me to sell him for 4 years. He held Webb's gaze. You tell him Miss Carter is comfortable and not leaving Thursday. Anything else he wants to know, he can ride up and ask me himself. Webb's careful smile didn't waver, but his eyes had gone a degree cooler. He might do that, he said. Doors always open, Caleb said. Webb looked at Emily one more time, the same sweeping assessment, the kind that was taking inventory, and then he turned his horse and started back down the trail without another word. They watched him go. The sound of the hooves faded into the trees. Emily let out a breath. He'll be back. Not him. Tobias, maybe. Webb was just the opening offer. The opening offer for what? Caleb set down the rope. Tobias McKenna owns 3/4 of the businesses in Dry Creek and has claims on about 1/3 of the land in this valley. He's been trying to buy this slope for years because there's water on it spring up behind the north tree line that runs year-round. He looked at the trail where Webb had disappeared. He doesn't like things he can't buy. And I've become one of those things. You walked away from his arrangement, in front of his town. Caleb picked up the rope again. Men like Tobias, that's not a minor thing. Emily sat with that for a moment. The weight of it. The way something that had felt in the moment, like simple survival standing still in the street, not crying, not begging, had already become something larger, something with consequences she was only beginning to see. I didn't do it to embarrass him, she said. I was just standing there. I know. I didn't even say anything, not really. Emily. He said her name straightforwardly. No drama in it, the way you say someone's name when you need them to stop and hear you. You survived it. That's what you did. The rest of it is Tobias's problem. She looked at him. You're very calm about all this. Gets you further than the alternative. She almost laughed. Not quite, but almost. The rest of the morning went like the first one had, except that she knew the kitchen better, now knew where the flour tin stuck. Knew that the pump needed 3 strokes before the water ran clear. Knew which floorboard had a soft spot and which window had the best light in the afternoon. Small things. The kind of things that take a place from foreign to familiar, one detail at a time. She was rehanging the loose shelf when Caleb came in for water and stopped in the doorway of the kitchen. Where did you find the bracket? He said. 3rd drawer. Is that wrong? No. He watched her for a moment. The nail's not going to hold in that wood. The grain's wrong. I know. I found a screw in the same drawer. Do you have something to drive it with? He got the tool without comment, stood next to her, and held the shelf while she drove the screw. She could feel the steadiness of him, the particular solidity of someone who didn't need to fill every moment with words, and she focused on the work, on the satisfying resistance, and then give of the screw going in clean. There, she said. She pressed down on the shelf, solid. She looked up and found him looking at the shelf, not at her. His expression, something she couldn't quite read. Used to hold better, he said. Before. Before what? A pause. Before I stopped paying attention to it. She let that sit. She'd learned already that with Caleb Morgan, the things he didn't say were often as important as the things he did, and that pressing on them was about as useful as pressing on stone. It'll hold now, she said. Yeah. She moved back to the stove. He went to the pump for water, and the morning went on. 4 days into it, she started to understand the rhythm of the place. Caleb was up before light out before she'd fully woken. Back by midday. Ate whatever was there, he wasn't particular. Ate with the focused efficiency of a man who thought about food as fuel rather than comfort. Afternoons he worked closer to the cabin, the fence, the woodpile, whatever the property needed. Evenings he sat on the porch until the light failed. He rarely started conversations, but he answered every question she asked him, fully specifically without condescension. She'd noticed that about him in the street in Dry Creek, the way he'd spoken to her, not about her, not at her. She noticed it more as the days went on. "What do you do in winter?" she asked on the fourth evening, the two of them on the porch, the air finally cooling now that the sun was down. Less of this, more of that. He nodded vaguely toward the woodpile. "Hunting, checking the spring, reading if the light's good." "You have books." "Some." "I saw. Dickens. A Wilderness Survey report from 1871. 2 Bibles." He glanced at her. "You looked." "I was curious." She didn't apologize for it. "Do you get lonely?" He was quiet for long enough that she thought he wasn't going to answer. Then, "I used to think that word meant the same thing as being alone. Took me a while to figure out they're different." "What's the difference?" "Being alone is a condition. Lonely is what happens when you're around people who don't see you." He looked at the valley. "Up here I know what I am. Down there?" He nodded toward the distant smear of Dry Creek. "I'm what people have decided." Emily thought about standing in that street, about the specific particular loneliness of being publicly assessed and found insufficient, about how you could be surrounded by 100 people watching you and feel more alone than you'd ever felt in an empty room. "I know something about that," she said. "I figured you might." The porch was quiet for a while. Below, the valley was going dark. Above, the sky was doing the thing it did up here at altitude, going very fast from pink to deep blue to something so full of stars, it looked like a different sky entirely than the one she'd known in cities. "Caleb," she said. "Why did you step in?" "That day. You could have stayed in the lumberyard." He was quiet. She watched the side of his face. "Tobias has been speaking to people like that for 20 years, he said finally. "Towns let it go because he keeps the money moving." He paused. "Gets old." That's not a full answer. He looked at her then. Straight at her, the way he'd looked at her in the street, not measuring, not assessing, just seeing. "You didn't look like you needed rescuing," he said. "You looked like you needed one person to not look away." Emily held that, the precise accuracy of it, the way it landed somewhere in her chest with a weight that was almost pain. "Well," she said after a moment, "thank you for that." "Don't thank me for it." "Why not?" "Because it shouldn't have been a favor," he said. "It should have been nothing remarkable at all." She looked at him for a moment longer. Then she looked back at the sky because the sky was safer. She didn't say anything else. Neither did he. They sat until the stars were fully out, and then she went inside to sleep, and she slept deeply for the first time since she'd left Millbrook. The 5th day brought a visitor she hadn't expected. She was at the pump when she heard footsteps on the trail. Not a horse this time, just boots moving at the pace of someone who'd walked a long way, and wasn't in a hurry, because there was no point being in a hurry after a walk like that. She straightened and turned, and the woman who came around the tree line was perhaps 60, gray-braided, built like someone who'd spent 40 years doing exactly what needed to be done, and not a minute more. "You're Emily Carter," the woman said. It wasn't a question. "I am. I'm Agnes Holt. I've got the property on the East Ridge." She looked Emily up and down, not unkindly, but directly with the frank assessment of someone who didn't have time to work up to things gradually. "How are you finding it up here?" "Manageable," Emily said. Agnes made a sound that was probably approval. "Caleb know you get visitors." "I imagine he'd understand." "Smart." Agnes sat herself down on the porch step without being invited with the ease of someone who'd sat on this step many times before. I heard what happened in town. Word travels fast when it involves Tobias McKenna being made to look small. She glanced at Emily. You don't seem like what I expected. What did you expect? Someone who cried about it. I thought about it, Emily said honestly. Agnes laughed short and real nothing performed in it. Good, means you're honest. She looked toward the trail Caleb usually came down from the north fence line. He taking care of you all right? He's not taking care of me, Emily said more sharply than she intended. Then more carefully. He gave me a place to think. That's different. Agnes looked at her with something that might have been interest. You know how many women have come through here thinking they wanted frontier life and lasted 2 weeks. I didn't come here thinking I wanted frontier life. No. You came here thinking you'd found a way out of whatever you'd left. Agnes said it with no cruelty, just the flatness of someone who'd seen enough to be direct. What had you left? Emily considered her options. Deflection, politeness, the careful version of the truth. She looked at Agnes Holt, sitting on the porch step with her gray braid and her frank eyes, and decided that deflection wasn't worth the energy. A life that was mostly other people's ideas of what I should be, she said. Agnes was quiet for a moment. Then, all right, she said. That's a better answer than most. She stayed an hour. She told Emily where the spring was, the one Caleb had mentioned Tobias wants. That water always has. Don't let anyone tell you it isn't the real reason he's pushing. And she told her which plants on the slope were edible and which would make you wish you'd been more careful. And she told her that the loose step on the porch had been loose since 1881 and she'd given up mentioning it. When she left, Emily felt something she hadn't felt in 5 days connected. Not to a place or a plan, but to a person. To someone who'd looked at her and not found her lacking. She was thinking about this when Caleb came back down from the fence line, and she was still standing at the pump where Agnes had found her, staring at the middle distance. You all right? He asked. Agnes Holt came by. He paused. Agnes. Something in his face settled. What did she want? To look at me. Emily glanced at him. I think I passed. He nodded slow, and she saw what looked like relief move through him, just briefly, just a flicker before his expression went back to its usual level. Agnes doesn't visit people she doesn't think are worth visiting, he said. That's what I gathered. He moved past her to the pump, cupped his hands under the water, and washed his face and neck in the way of someone coming off a hot morning's work. Emily watched him without meaning to, the way he moved the economy of it. Nothing wasted. He'd taken his hat off. Without it, he looked younger somehow, and more worn in the same moment. The north fence is holding, he said. Reporting, not conversing. Good. Found tracks up by the spring. Might be someone checking the water access. Emily went still. Tobias's people? Maybe. Could be surveyors. Could be someone curious about the property boundary. He dried his face on the back of his sleeve. Either way, I need to know. What will you do? Check the county records. Make sure my claim is documented right. He looked at her. Tobias has a habit of finding errors in documentation that weren't there before his people looked at them. She understood what he was saying. He'd try to take your land. He's tried before, had a disagreement with the county clerk 2 years back. Man found a discrepancy in my original claim. Turned out the discrepancy had been written in, not filed in. Took me 4 months and a federal surveyor to clear it up. He said all of this with the calm flatness of someone who had long since processed his anger about it and was now just reporting history. I got there first that time. Emily looked at him. And now you've given Tobias a new reason to come at you. Now I've given Tobias a new reason to try, he said. Same thing he was always going to do. Just sooner. Because of me. He looked at her steadily. Because of him, not you. She opened her mouth. He held up one hand, not silencing, just pausing. Tobias McKenna does what Tobias McKenna does, he said. You didn't start that. He'd have found another reason if it wasn't you. He wants this water, and he wants this land, and he wants anyone who won't deal with him to understand what that costs them." He dropped his hand. "I understood that before you got off the coach. Nothing's changed." Emily closed her mouth. Thought about it. Decided he was probably right in the way that certain people were right, not because the world was fair, but because they'd seen enough of it to know where the fault lines actually ran. "All right," she said. "All right," he agreed. They went inside for the midday meal she'd left on the stove, and he ate everything, and she watched him from across the table and thought about fault lines and about water and about what it cost a person to hold their ground. On the 7th day, the letter arrived. She knew it was from her uncle before she'd opened it, because no one else knew where she was. She hadn't written to anyone, hadn't known what to say, and the handwriting on the outer fold was his. Careful, deliberate, the handwriting of a man who had opinions about penmanship. The letter carrier had come up the trail on a mule, which he did twice weekly for the handful of properties on the upper slope. And he'd handed the envelope to Emily with the incurious efficiency of a man who carried a great many things to a great many places and had no time to wonder about the contents. She waited until the carrier had gone, sat on the porch, opened it. Her uncle wrote the way he did everything, with confidence in his own position and without particular curiosity about anyone else's. Emily. "I have received word from Mr. McKenna that the arrangement did not proceed. I am disappointed, though not entirely surprised, as your mother's side of the family has always had difficulty accepting practical necessity. Mr. McKenna has indicated that you remained in the territory rather than returning as he arranged. I urge you to reconsider. Your situation there, whatever it may be, cannot be in your best interest. You have obligations. Come home. Come home." As if she had one. She sat with the letter until she heard Caleb's boots on the porch, and then she folded it precisely in half and held it on her knee. He sat in the other chair, looked at the folded letter. Didn't ask. "My uncle," she said. He nodded. "He wants me to come back. He says I have obligations." She looked at the letter. "He arranged the marriage to Tobias. Did I tell you that?" "No. He wrote to Tobias 18 months ago, without telling me. By the time I knew about it, there were letters going back and forth, and I didn't know how to stop it without losing the only household I had." She stopped, started again. "So I told myself it might be all right, that Tobias might be, that it might work." Caleb was quiet. "It was the most cowardly thing I've ever done," she said. "Surviving isn't cowardice. It wasn't surviving. It was hoping someone else would solve the problem." She looked at the folded letter. "And then I got off that coach, and Tobias solved it in a way I hadn't accounted for, and I stood in that street thinking, well, now what? And then I came out of the lumberyard. And then you came out of the lumberyard." She looked at him. "Was that calculated? Did you see it coming?" "No. I saw a man speaking to a woman like she was a line item in an account book." He paused. "I've seen Tobias do it to other people. Usually I stay out of it because they want to sort it themselves." He looked at her. "You weren't sorting it. You were just holding still, like someone used to holding still in situations like that." Emily said nothing. "That's what I couldn't walk past," he said. She held the letter for a long moment. Then she stood up, walked to the edge of the porch, and dropped it into the ash bucket beside the door that was for kindling and spare wood scraps and other things that needed to eventually become fire. Caleb watched her do it. "I'm not going back," she said. "I know. I don't know what I'm going to do instead, but I'm not going back." He looked at the ash bucket, then at her. "That seems like enough for today." Emily looked at the mountains. The summer light was enormous up here, hitting different than it did in valleys, hitting the way truth sometimes hit, without softening, without apology, showing you the shape of everything. She thought, "You've done harder things than this." And for the first time she believed it, without having to talk herself into it. She went back to her chair. He was still in his. The afternoon moved around them the way afternoons did up here, slow and full of light, and neither of them spoke, and it was exactly enough. The second letter came on a Thursday. Emily knew it was different before she opened it. The handwriting on the outside wasn't her uncle's careful script. It was something else, something official, the kind of penmanship that came from a man who wrote letters for legal purposes and knew exactly what weight a word could carry when it was written down and witnessed. She was alone when it arrived. Caleb had gone down to Dry Creek for supplies the first time either of them had mentioned the town since she'd arrived, and he'd said it plainly that morning over coffee. "I need to go down. You want anything specific?" As if it were simply a practical matter. As if Dry Creek were simply a town and not the place where her entire situation had been created in the span of 10 minutes on a Monday afternoon. She'd said, "Thread, brown if they have it, the hem on my work dress is coming loose." He'd nodded and gone. The letter carrier handed her the envelope with the same incurious efficiency as the last time, and Emily stood on the porch and looked at the return mark pressed into the outer fold, and felt something cold move through her chest before she'd read a single word. McKenna Land and Commerce. Dry Creek, Colorado Territory. She opened it. The language was formal and carefully constructed, the kind of language that meant to sound like courtesy while functioning as a threat. Mr. McKenna wished to inform Miss Carter that the original arrangement between herself and Mr. McKenna, facilitated by her uncle Mr. Gerald Carter of Millbrook, Ohio, had involved certain financial considerations that had not yet been resolved. Specifically, Mr. McKenna had advanced funds to Mr. Gerald Carter in anticipation of the arrangement being fulfilled. Given that the arrangement had not been fulfilled through no fault of Mr. McKenna's, he was within his rights to seek restitution of those funds. He was prepared to consider the matter settled, however, if Miss Carter would present herself at his offices in Dry Creek at her earliest convenience to discuss the terms of a revised arrangement. Emily read it twice. Then she sat down on the porch step, the solid one, and read it a third time. Her uncle had taken money. Of course he had. She sat with that knowledge and felt it settle into her, felt the particular weight of realizing that the thing you'd told yourself wasn't true had been true all along. She hadn't been promised in marriage. She'd been sold. The arrangement had never been about what might suit Emily Carter. It had been about what Gerald Carter needed from Tobias McKenna, and Emily had been the currency. She was still sitting there when Agnes Holt appeared at the edge of the yard, moving at her usual purposeful pace, her gray braid over one shoulder, and her expression already shifted into something alert and watchful. "I saw the carrier on his way down," Agnes said, looking at Emily's face. "What is it?" Emily handed her the letter. Agnes read it without sitting down. Her expression didn't change much. It was already the expression of a woman who'd seen a great deal of the world and had calibrated her reactions accordingly, but something in her jaw tightened. She handed the letter back. "Tobias McKenna," she said, "is a man who never does one thing when two will serve him better. He gave my uncle money. He gave your uncle money because that's how he acquires things. He pays in advance, so the obligation exists before the other person fully understands what they've agreed to." Agnes sat down on the porch beside her. "This is not about you, Emily. This is about Caleb's land." Emily looked at her. "What do you mean?" "I mean that Tobias has been looking for a way to pressure Caleb Morgan for 4 years. Caleb won't sell, won't move, won't negotiate, and the county clerk situation 2 years ago left Tobias looking incompetent in front of people whose opinion he values." Agnes nodded at the letter. "You are how he gets at Caleb. If he can make your being here look improper, if he can make Caleb's situation complicated enough, he thinks Caleb will want you gone. And if you're gone, you have to go somewhere. And if you have to go somewhere, he has something to offer." The cold thing in Emily's chest expanded. "He's using me as leverage." "He's attempting to." "And the money my uncle took?" "Real or not, it doesn't matter," Agnes said. "What matters is that it's on paper and it has your name on it, and it gives him a reason to come up this mountain with legal standing." She paused. "Has Caleb seen this?" "He's in town." Agnes made a sound that was not quite a curse, but was the shape of one. "When does he get back?" "This afternoon." Then we wait. But they didn't wait easily. Agnes stayed, which Emily was grateful for in a way she couldn't quite have put into words. Not because Agnes offered comfort exactly, but because her presence was its own kind of steadiness. She didn't say it'll be all right or don't worry. She made coffee and talked about the East Ridge property and asked Emily practical questions about what she'd learned to do in the 2 weeks she'd been on the slope, and the conversation moved like water over rocks, steady and continuous, and Emily held herself together inside it. Caleb came back at mid-afternoon. He came into the yard and saw Agnes and read whatever was in Emily's face before either of them spoke. He tied the horse and came to the porch. What happened? Emily gave him the letter. He read it standing. His face didn't move. That was the thing about Caleb Morgan's face when he was processing something serious. It went very still, not closed, but still the way a pond goes, still before a storm. He read it once, folded it, and handed it back. "All right," he said. "All right." Emily stared at him. "He's claiming I owe him money. He's claiming my uncle." "I heard. All right means I understand the situation." He took off his hat, ran one hand through his hair, replaced the hat. "Your uncle. Did he ever tell you about any money?" "No." "Did he ever mention McKenna in his letters to you before the arrangement?" "No. The arrangement appeared fully formed. I didn't know about it until the letters were already 6 weeks old and my uncle told me it was decided." She stopped. "He told me it was a good opportunity, that Tobias was a man of standing, that I should be grateful." Caleb looked at her. Something moved behind his eyes. Anger, she thought, but contained, banked down, the way you bank a fire when you need it to last. "You weren't told," he said. "I was told after the fact and asked to agree." She met his gaze. "I told myself agreeing was practical. I told you that." "You did." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "This document isn't legal. An arrangement like that between your uncle and McKenna doesn't transfer obligation to you. You weren't a party to it. You didn't sign anything. He doesn't need it to be legal." Agnes said from the doorway, where she'd been quiet long enough that Emily had half forgotten her. "He needs it to be enough. Enough for the county judge. Enough for the town to talk about. Enough to make this situation difficult." Caleb looked at Agnes. Something passed between them, the shorthand of people who'd been neighbors a long time and had navigated difficult terrain before. "I need to send a wire," he said. "To who?" Emily asked. "Man I know. Federal Land Office in Denver. He knows property law, and he knows Tobias's methods." He looked at Emily. "This is going to take a few days. In the meantime," he paused. "Don't go to town." "I wasn't planning to." "I know. I'm saying it anyway." He held her gaze. "Tobias is expecting you to panic, to feel like you don't have options. He's counting on you not understanding that he can't actually compel you to do anything." Emily looked at the letter in her hand. "He's counting on me being alone." "He's miscounted," Caleb said. He went inside. She heard him at the desk he kept in the corner of the main room, the scratch of pen on paper. The particular focused silence of someone composing something they needed to get right. Agnes came to stand beside Emily on the porch. "He'll sort it," Agnes said. "I know he'll try." "No." Agnes's voice was precise. "He'll sort it. Caleb Morgan has been fighting Tobias McKenna in one way or another for 4 years, and he has lost exactly one minor skirmish. The county clerk situation." She paused. "That will not happen again." Emily looked at the door, heard the pen scratch. "Agnes. Before all this, before I came, was Caleb." She stopped, not quite sure how to frame the question she was actually asking. Agnes looked at her with sharp, kind eyes. "Was he lonely?" Emily said nothing. "He was alone," Agnes said. "He chose it. There's a reason for that, and it's his reason to tell, not mine." She was quiet for a moment. "But I'll say this. That step's been loose for 3 years. He never fixed it." Emily looked at the porch step. the solid one where she always sat. The second step, the loose one. The one she'd noted on her first day and navigated around every time since. She didn't know what to do with that information, so she filed it away in the place where she kept things she wasn't ready to look at yet. "I'll fix it," she said. Agnes smiled, small real. "I know," she said. Caleb rode down to send the wire the next morning, and Emily spent the day working. Not to distract herself, or not only to distract herself, but because the cabin needed it, and she was the one there, and work was the truest thing she'd found in her life. The one thing that never pretended to be something it wasn't. She fixed the step, found the tools, found the right board in the stack of spare lumber behind the cabin, measured it twice the way her father had taught her before he'd died, and left her to her uncle's household. She replaced the step and tested it with her full weight, and it held. She was sweeping out the main room when she heard voices on the trail. Not Caleb, he wouldn't be back until afternoon, and she'd come to know the particular sound of his horse on the upper stretch of trail. This was different. 2 horses, maybe 3, and men's voices, and they weren't trying to be quiet. She set the broom down. She was at the door, and then threw it on the porch before she'd consciously decided to move. 3 men came into the yard on horseback. She recognized one of them, Webb Tobias's man with his careful eyes and his smile. The other 2 she didn't know, but they had the look of men who were paid to stand behind other men and make them feel more substantial. "Miss Carter?" Webb said pleasantly. "Mr. Morgan not at home." "He's not." She stood in the center of the porch and kept her hands still at her sides. "Can I help you?" "We were hoping to leave a document for him. Legal notice regarding the property boundary survey." Webb reached into his coat and produced an envelope, held it out. "If you'd be so kind." Emily looked at the envelope. She didn't take it. "You can leave it on the post," she said. "I won't be handling Mr. Morgan's legal correspondence." Webb's smile stayed. "Of course. I also have something for you, Miss Carter." He produced a second envelope. "From Mr. McKenna directly. A personal letter this time, not the legal matter. He wanted me to tell you he'd very much like to speak with you, privately, as a courtesy." "You can keep that too," Emily said. Webb looked at her for a moment. Something shifted behind his careful eyes, not anger exactly, but the particular recalibration of a man who'd expected less resistance. "Miss Carter," he said, his voice dropping to something that was probably meant to sound friendly. "I understand this situation is uncomfortable. I want you to know that Mr. McKenna has no desire to make your circumstances more difficult. He's a reasonable man. The legal matter with your uncle, he'd be willing to set it aside entirely. He simply wants to speak with you. And I've told you I won't be taking his letter." Emily didn't raise her voice. "You've delivered your message. I'd ask you to leave the property now." "This is Morgan's property," Webb said. "Not yours. Then you can wait for Mr. Morgan and ask his permission to stay." She met Webb's eyes. "If you think that conversation will go better for you." The pause was long. One of the men behind Webb shifted in his saddle. Webb set both envelopes on the fence post. "We'll leave these here," he said. "Good day, Miss Carter." He turned his horse. His men followed. She stood on the porch and watched them go down the trail and didn't move until the last sound of hooves had faded. Then she sat down on the porch step, the fixed one, and pressed her hands flat on her knees and breathed. She was still sitting there when she realized her hands were shaking. Not from fear, from the specific physical aftermath of holding yourself completely still under pressure, the way a spring shakes when you finally release it. She looked at her hands for a moment, then folded them deliberately in her lap. She'd held, and they'd left, and she hadn't shown them anything they could use. When Caleb came back 2 hours later, she told him about it flatly and precisely, the way he reported things to her, facts, first impressions after. He listened without interrupting. Then he went to the fence post and picked up both envelopes. He opened the legal one, read it, set it face down on the table. He looked at the other one for a moment, then looked at Emily. "You want to know what it says?" "No," she said. Then, "Yes." He opened it, read it, folded it back. He says you deserve better than a mountain man's cabin, Caleb said. Says he was hasty in his judgment, and he'd like to make it right. Says he can offer you a proper situation, a home, standing in the community. He set the letter down. Says the legal matter with your uncle can be forgotten entirely. Emily looked at the letter. In exchange for what? He doesn't say it that way. He says a renewed conversation. But in exchange for what? Caleb held her gaze. For you going back. She looked at the letter for a long moment. She thought about the street in Dry Creek. About this is not the woman I agreed to take, said loud enough for every person within 100 feet to hear. She thought about the letter from her uncle. Come home. She thought about Webb in the yard today, with his careful smile and his 2 men behind him. Caleb, she said. What does the legal notice say? A pause. He's filed for a property boundary resurvey. Claims the original survey from my land grant has an error in the eastern markers. He was very still. It doesn't. But if he can get a sympathetic surveyor to the site before I can get the federal office involved, he can create a dispute that takes years to resolve. And your water access is on the eastern end of the property. He looked at the notice. Yes. Emily sat with that for a moment. The full shape of it. The letter to her, the notice to him delivered on the same day by the same man in a single visit. Not coincidence. Strategy. He's trying to press both of us at once, she said. So we're each dealing with our own problem instead of helping the other. Caleb looked at her. Something in his expression shifted just slightly, just enough. Yes, he said. That's not going to work, she said. No. He agreed. It's not. That night, the wind came up. Not the gentle evening wind she'd gotten used to, but something with real weight behind it coming down off the high peaks and pressing against the cabin walls with a low, continuous sound that made the structure feel both solid and small. The temperature dropped 20 degrees between supper and dark. Emily was washing the dishes when she heard the first thing hit the roof a branch, probably or debris from the tree line, and then the rain started. Not a mountain shower. A real mountain storm, the kind that didn't announce itself that came and committed. She remembered the roof. She turned from the sink and looked at the far corner of the main room and watched for approximately 4 seconds before the first drip came. She found the bucket. She'd been keeping it under the kitchen bench. For some reason, she hadn't examined closely some instinct about preparation, and she moved it to the corner. The drip became a thin, steady stream. She adjusted the bucket and stepped back. Caleb came out of his room with his boots on and looked at the bucket and looked at the ceiling and looked at her. I found the bucket, she said. He looked at the bucket again. There was something in his expression she couldn't quite identify. Not quite surprised, not quite the thing adjacent to a smile that she'd started to recognize. Something more complicated than either. I'll fix it, he said. In the morning, she said. There's nothing to be done right now. He looked at her. She looked at him. Outside, the rain pressed against the cabin, steady and real, and the bucket dripped, and the stove gave off its heat, and they were both just standing in the main room of a cabin on a mountain in the middle of a storm. The wire I sent, he said, to Denver. I should have a response by Saturday. He moved to the stove, refilled his coffee from the pot she'd kept warm. My contact there knows property law. He'll know if the resurvey claim can be challenged at the filing stage. And if it can't, then we challenge it at the next stage. He sat at the table. It takes longer, but Tobias is counting on me not having the patience for a long fight. He's wrong about that. Emily sat across from him. The bucket dripped. The rain pressed. Caleb, she said, tell me about the clerk situation. 2 years ago. What actually happened? He looked at his coffee. I told you. You told me the facts. I'm asking what actually happened. He was quiet for a moment. Outside, something cracked a tree branch somewhere in the wind. I had a partner, he said, on this land when I first claimed it. Man named David Pierce. We worked it together for 2 years. The cabin was his idea. The spring access was what made it viable. We both saw it the same way. He stopped. Tobias approached David first, made him an offer. David came to me and said he was thinking about it. The money was good. He had family back east. He'd been out here longer than he'd planned. Emily waited. I told him I'd buy his share, Caleb said. We agreed on a number. I had the money. He turned the coffee cup in his hands. Tobias found that out. And before the transfer was filed, somebody, and I know who, but I couldn't prove it then, somebody altered the original survey document. Made it look like my claim was 18 acres smaller than it was filed, which put the spring on disputed land instead of mine. And David had already taken Tobias's money by then. He said it without bitterness, or mostly without it. He thought the deal was fair. I don't think he knew what Tobias had done to the paperwork. He looked up. I think Tobias told him the document error was there from the beginning, that the spring had never been clearly mine. But you proved it wasn't. Federal surveyor 4 months and a copy of the original filing I'd kept myself. His voice was level. Most men don't keep copies. Tobias knew that. I'm not most men. Emily looked at him. And David? Caleb was quiet for a long moment. He left, he said. Went back east. I don't know where. There was something under those words, something old and healed over, but not entirely gone, and Emily recognized the shape of it. The specific loss that comes not from someone's malice, but from someone's choice. Someone you'd trusted choosing the easier path. I'm sorry, she said. He looked at her. Don't be. I kept the land. I'm sorry about David. Something moved in his face. He looked back at his coffee. Yeah, he said after a moment. That one took a while. The rain pressed on. The bucket dripped. The stove held its heat. He's going to try the same thing again, Emily said, with the resurvey. He's going to try something like it. Caleb nodded. He learns a little. He'll be more careful this time, which means I need to be faster. He looked up. The difference this time is that I know what to look for. Emily said, What can I do? He looked at her like the question surprised him, not the asking of it, but what it assumed. That she was inside this. That it was hers to help with. The federal man who's coming, he said slowly. He'll need to see the original land documents. I have them in the desk. If you... He stopped. You said you were a teacher. I taught reading and arithmetic for 4 years. Can you read legal documents, survey records? I've never tried, but I can learn. He was quiet for a moment. Then he got up and went to the desk and came back with a folder of papers. Old ones, their edges worn soft, their ink faded in places but clear. He set them on the table. These are the originals, he said. The filing, the survey markers, the water rights notation. He sat back down. If someone altered these or tried to, there would be inconsistencies in the measurement language, the way the units are recorded, the way the markers are described. He looked at her. 2 sets of eyes are better than 1. Emily pulled the documents toward her. They were dense and formal and written in the particular language of territory law in the 1880s, which was precise in some ways and maddeningly vague in others. She read the first paragraph slowly. You'll have to explain the notation system, she said. I know. He moved his chair around the table until he was sitting beside her instead of across close enough that she could hear him clearly over the rain. He started explaining. She started reading. The rain went on outside and the bucket dripped in the corner, and the two of them bent over the papers in the lamplight, and it was the most purposeful Emily Carter had felt in a very long time. The storm moved through by midnight. She didn't know what woke her, the silence after the rain maybe, or some shift in the air, but she was awake and the cabin was still, and the only sound was the last of the water running off the eaves. She lay in the dark and listened to nothing for a while. Then she heard footsteps. Not alarming, she knew the sound of Caleb's boots. By now knew the difference between him moving through the cabin at night for water and any other reason. But they stopped, and then she heard the front door open quietly. She got up. He was on the porch, standing in the doorway, not quite inside, and not quite outside looking at the sky. She came and stood behind him. The air after the storm was cold and clean, and the stars had come back out with the particular intensity they had at altitude, like they'd been scrubbed. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked. "Heard something on the slope." He didn't turn around. "Probably nothing. Animal moving after the storm." He paused. "Could be a man checking the eastern markers in the dark." Emily was quiet for a moment. Would he do that? At night? Tobias wouldn't, but someone working for Tobias might, if they wanted to place a marker before morning. His voice was very level. "I might be wrong." "Are you going to go look?" "Already did. Came back and didn't find anything clear." He was still looking at the sky. "But I'm not certain." She stood behind him in the doorway of the cabin, the two of them between the inside and the outside, the storm-washed darkness all around. She thought about the documents on the table, about the resurvey filing, about Webb in the yard with his careful eyes. "I should tell you something," she said. He turned then. "When Webb was here, he said something after the envelopes after I told him to leave." She looked at him directly. "He said, 'This is Morgan's property, not yours.' And the way he said it," she stopped. "He wasn't trying to threaten me. He was reminding me that I have no standing here, that there's nothing to keep me here except your tolerance." She paused. "He was trying to tell me that you could make me leave, if this got difficult enough." Caleb looked at her for a long moment. The stars were very bright behind him. "He was wrong," Caleb said. "I know that." She held his gaze. "I'm telling you what he said because you should know what they're telling me, what arguments they're making." She paused. "They think the right pressure in the right place will make me go. And if I go, you're alone again, and alone is easier to isolate." He was very still. "I'm not going," she said. Caleb Morgan looked at Emily Carter on the porch of his cabin after a mountain storm, and something moved across his face that she couldn't name. Something older than the situation. Something that had more to do with the years before she'd ever arrived than with anything that had happened in the past 2 weeks. He said, "No one owns you. Not me. Not him. Not this town." She'd heard him say something like that before, in the street to Tobias. But this time it was different. This time it wasn't a declaration to a crowd. This time it was just the two of them, and the dark and the clean air, and it was something else entirely. "I know," she said. "Then stop telling me you're not going like it needs explaining," he said, not harshly, just plainly. "You're here, that's the fact. The rest of it is just Tobias making noise." She looked at him for a moment. Then she said, "The step's fixed, by the way." He looked down, tested it with his boot, looked up at her. "When did you—" "Yesterday morning." She went back inside. "Good night, Caleb." She heard him on the porch for another moment standing, looking at the step or the stars or both. And then he came inside too, and the door closed, and the cabin settled into quiet. She lay in her room and looked at the ceiling and listened to the mountain and thought about what came next, and for the first time since she'd gotten off that coach, what came next didn't feel like falling. It felt like standing on solid ground. The response from Denver arrived on a Saturday just as Caleb had said it would. Emily was in the kitchen when she heard the mule on the trail, and she was at the door before the carrier had cleared the tree line. He handed her one envelope, thin official, with a federal land office mark pressed into the corner. She brought it inside and set it on the table and didn't open it. She waited for Caleb. He came in from the woodpile. 20 minutes later, saw the envelope, saw her face, and sat down without taking off his gloves. He opened it cleanly, the way he did everything, no hesitation, no ceremony. Read it standing. Then he sat down. "Well," he said, "what does it say?" "Thomas Greer is coming." He set the letter on the table. "Federal Land Commissioner. He'll be here Tuesday." He looked at the letter. "He says the resurvey filing has procedural issues. Tobias's man used a surveyor who isn't licensed in Colorado territory. It should have been rejected at filing. Emily felt something loosen in her chest. Then it's over. It's a foothold. Caleb was careful with the word. It doesn't dismiss the claim entirely. Tobias can refile with a licensed surveyor, but it buys time, and it means Greer has jurisdiction to review the original documents on site. He paused. Which means Tobias can't move on the eastern markers without Greer knowing about it. And Greer, you trust him. I've met him twice. He's not Tobias's man. That's enough. He picked up the letter, folded it, put it in the desk. We need the documents organized before Tuesday, the ones we went through during the storm. I know where everything is, Emily said. He looked at her. Yeah, he said. I know you do. They spent Saturday afternoon and all of Sunday going through the papers again. Emily had been through them twice already, once in the lamplight during the storm following Caleb's explanations, and once on her own the following afternoon, while he was on the fence line reading them slowly and making notes on a separate sheet in the careful, precise handwriting she'd developed from years of writing lesson plans. She had questions now. Real ones, specific ones, the kind that came from actually understanding what she was reading rather than recognizing the shape of it. She asked them. He answered. Sometimes she caught something he'd glossed over, a notation in the original survey that described the eastern spring access in language that was slightly different from how Tobias's resurvey filing had characterized it. She'd marked it with a small pencil line. This word, she said, pointing, they used adjacent in the filing, but the original says inclusive. That's not the same thing. Caleb looked at where she was pointing. He was very still for a moment. No, he said. It's not. Is that what they changed in the clerk situation 2 years ago? No. That was the marker coordinates. This is different. He looked at the original. This is if you've got a document that says the spring access is inclusive to the land grant and a filing that says the spring is merely adjacent to the land. Adjacent means it could belong to either side of the boundary, Emily said. Yes. But inclusive means it's contained within. Yes. He was still looking at the word. If Greer sees this comparison, and he will because you're going to show it to him, Tobias's entire resurvey argument falls apart before it starts. Because the resurvey is premised on the spring being in disputed territory. If the original document makes clear it's inclusive to my grant, the dispute doesn't exist, Emily said. Caleb looked at her. The lamplight was on his face, and she could see the particular quality of his expression in this moment, not triumph, not relief, but something older and more solid than either. The look of a man who has held ground for a long time and has just found out the ground was always deeper than the other side believed. Where did you find it? He said. Third paragraph of the water rights notation. The language changes midway through. I think whoever wrote it used both words interchangeably, didn't realize they weren't the same thing in legal context. She looked at the document. Tobias's people probably read it and saw adjacent and stopped reading. They didn't get to the paragraph where it says inclusive. Or they did get there, Caleb said quietly, and they were counting on no one else reading carefully enough to notice the difference. Emily looked at the document. Thought about that. Thought about Webb in the yard. Thought about the letter to her, the legal notice to Caleb delivered on the same day, designed to split attention. Designed to make each of them focus on their own problem. They didn't count on 2 people reading, she said. No, Caleb said. They didn't. Monday came with a heat that had been building for a week, the kind of summer weight that sat on the mountains and didn't move. Emily was at the pump before 8, and she'd already done 2 hours of work in the kitchen garden, the one she'd been gradually bringing back to order since the second week, pulling weeds, resetting the rows, coaxing water into soil that had been neglected when Agnes appeared at the tree line. She wasn't alone. The woman behind her was younger, perhaps 35, with dark hair, and the look of someone who'd been moving fast for a while and was trying not to show it. Emily straightened. Agnes came across the yard with her usual direct pace and said, "This is Clara Hennessy. She's got the farm on the South Road, 2 miles below town." Clara Hennessy looked at Emily with eyes that were deciding something. Then she said, "You're the woman Tobias turned away." "I'm Emily Carter," Emily said. "I know who you are. The whole valley knows who you are." Clara's voice had an edge to it, not hostile, but pressured the edge of someone carrying something they need to put down. "I need to talk to you, both of you, if Caleb Morgan is here." Caleb was. He'd heard the voices from inside, and he came out. Now took in Clara Hennessy with one look and said, "Mrs. Hennessy, what happened?" Clara looked at him. "Tobias came to see Robert on Friday. My husband." She stopped. "He's been buying up the South Road properties for 2 years. Robert has been holding out." Another stop. "On Friday he told Robert that if we didn't sign by the end of the month, he'd call in the loan he's been holding on our equipment, the one we took out in '82. She looked between Caleb and Emily. "Robert came home and he said we had to sign. He said there was no way out." Caleb said, "What equipment loan?" "The thresher and the irrigation work we had done last spring." Her jaw was tight. $400 plus interest. "We can't cover it. We never could have covered it." That was the point. Tobias knew that when he offered the loan, he offered the terms knowing we'd never be clear of it. She looked at Caleb. "He's done it before, hasn't he, to other people?" Caleb didn't answer immediately. He looked at Clara Hennessy for a moment, and Emily saw in his face the weight of someone who knows an answer they don't want to give. "Yes," he said. "The Peterson property, the one he bought in '80. "Yes." "And the Garland place." "Yes." Clara's eyes closed for a second. When they opened, they were very steady. "There's a federal man coming tomorrow. Agnes told me." She looked at Caleb. "Is he the kind of man who handles more than land surveys?" Caleb was quiet. Emily watched him think. "Greer handles federal land and commerce disputes in this territory," he said slowly. "Property fraud, deliberate misrepresentation in a loan arrangement that's potentially federal jurisdiction if it crosses county lines." He paused. "Do you have the loan document?" "I brought it." Clara reached inside her coat and produced a folded paper. Caleb took it, read it. His jaw did the thing it did when he was containing something tight and held. He handed it to Emily. She read it. The loan document was legal on its face. The terms were printed in formal language, the interest rate clear, the collateral specified. What was not on the paper was everything that surrounded it. The context in which it had been offered, the conditions that made it impossible to repay the way it had been designed from the start as a mechanism of acquisition rather than a genuine lending arrangement. But there was something else. Emily read the third clause again slowly. "Caleb," she said, "I see it. The collateral clause. It specifies the equipment and any associated land improvements made with the loan proceeds." She looked up. "The irrigation work. If the loan is called, Tobias isn't just claiming the thresher. He's claiming the irrigation work," Caleb said, "which attaches to the land itself, which gives him a basis for a lien on the property." He looked at Clara. "Has Robert signed anything besides this original document?" "There was a paper last week. A man came from town from Tobias's office and said it was a routine renewal. Robert signed it." Clara's voice had gone very quiet. "I wasn't home. Robert didn't know." "Do you know what the paper was?" "I don't. I don't have a copy." Caleb looked at Emily. She looked at him. Between them, without speaking, something was understood. This was bigger than a property boundary. This was Tobias McKenna's method laid out in full. The loans, the paperwork, the routine renewals that weren't routine, the whole machine of it. "Mrs. Hennessy," Caleb said, "can you be here tomorrow at 10 when Greer arrives?" "Robert won't come. She stopped. "He's afraid. I understand. But I need you here. And I need whatever papers you have from Tobias's office, all of them, the original loan, anything else you've received." He held her gaze. "Can you do that?" Clara Hennessy looked at him for a long moment. "Yes," she said. After she left, Emily stood in the yard with Caleb and Agnes, and the heat pressed down on all three of them, and no one spoke for a moment. Then Agnes said, "How many others do you think?" "At least 4 properties on the South Road," Caleb said. "Maybe more." He looked at the trail Clara had taken down the mountain. He's been doing this for years, building the position piece by piece. This slope is the last piece he needs the water access the high ground. Once he has this, he controls the water rights for the whole South Valley. Emily said, and you're the last one who hasn't already been bought or borrowed into a corner. Yes, so the land dispute isn't really about the land. It never was. He looked at her. It's about making sure I don't have a legal position when the other situations come forward. He paused. If my claim is in dispute, my word in front of Greer is worth less. A landowner with a clean title is a witness. A landowner in a property fight is just another party with a grievance. Emily looked at him. He's been planning this since at least '81, Caleb said. The clerk situation was the first attempt. The resurvey is the second. He paused. The letter to you using your uncle's arrangement to create social pressure, that was something he added when the opportunity appeared. He looked at her directly. He didn't plan you. You were an accident of timing. But he's adaptive. She held that. The strange particular feeling of knowing that the worst morning of her life, standing in that street, being assessed and discarded in front of a town full of strangers, had been incorporated into someone else's long game almost as an afterthought. That she'd been turned into a tool before she'd even understood what the tool was for. I'm not going to be his leverage, she said. I know. I mean it. Whatever he's counting on from my situation, my uncertainty, my need for resolution, he's not going to get it. She looked at Caleb. I want to be useful tomorrow. Not just with the documents, with Greer. Caleb looked at her for a moment. What are you thinking? I'm thinking I'm the only person here who doesn't have a legal stake in the land, she said. Which means I can speak to Greer about the pattern without it looking like self-interest. She paused. I can lay out what I've read in those documents. The language changed the adjacent versus inclusive distinction. I can talk about the letter I received, the financial claim against my uncle, the way it was delivered the same day as your legal notice. She met his eyes. I can show him the machine, Caleb. From the outside, he was very still. Then he said, You'd have to be precise. Greer is good, but he's not sentimental. He needs facts laid in order, not impressions. I taught school for 4 years. I know how to lay facts in order. She held his gaze. Let me do this. Agnes, who had been quiet through all of this, said simply, Let her do it, Caleb. He looked at Agnes, then at Emily. Something in his expression did what it rarely did. Shifted, moved, showed something underneath. All right, he said. Thomas Greer arrived at 10:05 on Tuesday morning on a good horse with federal land office credentials in his coat pocket, and the kind of face that had seen enough of the territory to not be easily impressed by it. He was perhaps 50, spare through the frame, with the particular quality of attention that belongs to men who have learned to read documents and situations at the same speed. He took in the cabin, the yard, Caleb, Emily, and Clara Hennessy, who had arrived at 9:30, with a folder of papers under her arm, and the look of a woman who'd made a decision and was done being afraid of it with a single measured look. Mr. Morgan, he said, I've reviewed the resurvey filing. I have some questions. I have some answers, Caleb said, and some things you didn't ask for that you'll want to see. They went inside. Emily had the documents laid out on the table, in the order she and Caleb had decided, originals first, then the comparative materials, then Clara's loan documents, then the letter Emily had received with the legal notice delivered the same day. Everything labeled in Emily's clear handwriting with a separate sheet of notes that laid out the sequence of events in chronological order. Greer sat down and looked at the table and said, Who organized this? I did, Emily said. He looked at her. And you are? Emily Carter. I'm a... She stopped, started again. I'm staying here. I'm not a party to the land dispute. Then why are you at this table? Because I can read, she said. And because I noticed something in the original documents that Mr. Morgan would like you to see. Greer looked at Caleb. Caleb said nothing, just gestured at Emily. Greer looked back at Emily. "All right," he said. "Show me." She showed him. She took him through the water rights notation, through the language distinction between inclusive and adjacent, through the way the resurvey filing had used the latter word in characterizing the spring access. She was precise. She was specific. She didn't editorialize. She pointed at words on paper and explained what they meant in legal context, the way she'd learned from spending 3 evenings bent over those documents, with Caleb explaining territory law, until she understood it. Greer listened without interrupting. He read the sections she pointed to. He made 2 notes on the small pad he'd brought. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he looked at the documents for another moment, and then he said to no one in particular, "The resurvey filing uses adjacent in Section 2 subsection B. The original grant uses inclusive in the water rights notation 3rd paragraph." He paused. "The original is the controlling document." "Yes," Emily said. "The resurvey filing, if it had succeeded, would have reclassified the spring as adjacent to rather than inclusive in the grant. That reclassification would have placed the spring in disputed territory." "Yes. And disputed territory would have allowed a claim from any property that borders it." He looked up. "Including McKenna's eastern holdings." "Yes," Emily said. "That's what we believe." Greer looked at Caleb. "Was this the same method used in the county clerk situation?" "No. Different mechanism, same goal." Caleb's voice was level. "The clerk situation was altered coordinates. This is altered legal characterization." "He learned," Greer said. "He's adaptive," Emily said, and heard Caleb's word come out of her own mouth. Greer looked at her. Something shifted in his assessment of her, not much, but enough to be visible. "What else?" he said. She told him about Clara Hennessy. Clara told him herself directly, without the fear Emily had seen in her face the day before the paper on the table between them. Greer read the loan document, read the collateral clause, asked 3 specific questions about the renewal paper Robert had signed, which Clara couldn't answer fully because she didn't have it. "I'll need that document," Greer said. "I'll get it," Clara said. "I'll need the names of other property holders on the South Road who have outstanding arrangements with McKenna's office." Greer looked at Caleb. "Do you know them?" "I know some. Agnes Holt can tell you the rest." "Is she available today?" "She'll come when I send word," Caleb said. Greer made another note. He sat with everything for a moment. The documents, the notes, the people around the table, with the same quality of complete attention he'd had from the start. Then he said, "Mr. Morgan, the resurvey filing will be dismissed on procedural grounds, the unlicensed surveyor, and I'll recommend a review of McKenna's original objection on the basis of the language discrepancy Miss Carter identified. That review will take 30 days from Denver." "And in 30 days?" Caleb asked. "In 30 days, barring anything unexpected, your original grant is affirmed and the spring access is settled." Greer paused. "The South Road loan arrangements are a separate matter and will take longer to assess. But I want the Hennessy document and the names. If the pattern is what it appears to be, there's a commerce fraud question that goes above the county level." Emily looked at the table. Commerce fraud. Federal jurisdiction. Words that 2 weeks ago she would have understood in the abstract and now understood in the specific, in the weight of them, in the precision of what they could dismantle. Greer was preparing to leave returning documents to his case when he looked at Emily and said, "Miss Carter, the letter you received from McKenna, the one with the financial claim against your uncle, I'd like a copy." "You can take the original," she said. "I don't need it." He took it. At the door he paused and said to the room generally, "The filing was sloppy. The language was sloppier. Someone got confident." He looked at Caleb. "Confidence is always the mistake." He left. His horse's hooves went down the trail, steady and diminishing. Clara Hennessy sat at the table for a moment after he'd gone, her hands flat on her knees, her breath coming out slowly. Then she said, "Is it really?" "It's a beginning," Caleb said. "Greer is careful. He won't overpromise." "But the survey is settled," Emily said. "The spring is his. That part is settled." She looked at Clara. The rest takes time. Clara looked at her hands. Then she looked at Emily with an expression that was complicated relief and exhaustion and something that might have been the beginning of anger. The kind of anger that comes when you finally understand exactly how you've been managed. I've been afraid of that man for 2 years, she said. Robert has been afraid for longer. I know, Emily said. He counted on that. Clara's voice had gone quiet and precise. He counted on all of us being afraid and separate and not... She stopped. Not in the same room together. Yes, Emily said. That's what he counted on. Clara looked at her. How did you know to do this? You've been here 3 weeks. Emily was quiet for a moment. She thought about the letter from her uncle in the ash bucket, about standing in the street with nowhere to go, about reading documents in lamplight with a man who'd explain territory law without once suggesting she wouldn't understand it. I've had help, she said. After Clara left, Caleb stood in the doorway of the cabin for a long moment. Emily was clearing the table, returning documents to their folder, restoring the order she'd built. He watched her for a moment without speaking. Then he said, You were better than I expected. She looked up. What did you expect? I don't know. Something good. Not... He paused. Not the adjacent inclusive thing. That was... He stopped again. It was there in the document, she said. I just read it. Most people look at a document and see pages, he said. You looked at it and saw an argument. He was quiet for a second. That's not common. Emily set the folder down, looked at him. Caleb, what happens now? With Tobias? He came inside, let the door close behind him. He'll hear about Greer's visit by tonight. Webb will tell him. He moved to the desk, set the folder in its place. He'll know the resurvey is dead. He'll know I had help here today. He paused. He'll be angry. And when he's angry, he does something. He's not the kind of man who absorbs a loss and recalibrates quietly. He looked at her. He'll come. Here. Probably not here. He'll come to town and he'll make noise and he'll try to reframe what happened today as something other than what it was. Caleb's voice was level, certain. He'll say Greer was biased, that the documents were tampered with, that there's an improper arrangement between a federal official and a private landowner. He paused. He'll say whatever makes the story go his way. And people will believe him. Some will, some always do. He looked at her directly. But Greer's findings are on paper. Paper doesn't argue. Paper just sits there being true. Emily looked at him. The afternoon light was on his face, summer heavy. The way light in this place was always a little more present than it had been anywhere else she'd lived. She thought about the last 3 weeks. About the woman who'd gotten off a coach with $4 and a broken buckle and no plan. I'm going to need something to do, she said. Here. Not just cooking and fixing things. Something with purpose. He tilted his head just slightly. What kind of purpose? She thought about the children Agnes had mentioned in passing a week ago, the families on the upper slope who sent their children down to Dry Creek for school, a half-day ride each way, which meant most of them didn't go at all. She thought about her chalk-dusty hands and 4 years of lesson plans, and the specific satisfaction of watching someone understand a thing they hadn't understood before. Agnes mentioned there are children on this slope without a school, she said. Caleb looked at her for a moment. There are. I was a school teacher, she said. I'm a good one. I know. There's room in this cabin. If the table were moved, the main room would hold 8 children easily. She watched his face. It wouldn't have to be permanent, but it would be something. He was quiet. She could see him thinking, not hesitating, but actually thinking the careful, specific way he thought about things that mattered. You'd need approval from the county, he said finally. Formal certification as a teaching station. I know, I've done it before. She held his gaze. Is that a yes? He looked at her for one more moment. Then he went to the door and picked up his hat and said, I'll pull the table away from the wall this evening. You can see if the space works. He went out. The door closed. Emily stood in the main room of the cabin in the summer afternoon light and felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time, maybe longer than she could easily remember. She felt useful. Not in the survival sense, not in the holding together sense. Useful in the way that meant she was in the right place, doing the right thing at the right time. She went back to the table, picked up a pencil, started making a list. Tobias McKenna arrived on Thursday. She heard the horses from inside, multiple horses, 4 or 5, and she came to the door, and he was there at the edge of the yard, on a gray horse better dressed than she'd ever seen him, 3 men behind him, and Webb off to his left. He looked different on his own land than he had in the street in Dry Creek, less certain. Something in his jaw that she hadn't noticed before. Caleb came around the side of the cabin from the woodpile, the axe still in his hand, not raised, just carried. He looked at Tobias with the calm steadiness she'd come to know. "McKenna," he said. "Morgan." Tobias's voice was controlled. "I wanted to speak with you directly, as neighbors." "You've got neighbors on the South Road who'd appreciate the same courtesy," Caleb said. "But go ahead." Tobias looked at Emily in the doorway. "Miss Carter, I'm glad you're still well." She said nothing. He looked back at Caleb. "The federal man who came Tuesday?" "Greer, yes. I've spoken with my legal representation. They believe the resurvey was filed in good faith and that the procedural questions Greer raised don't. The resurvey is dead, Tobias." Caleb's voice didn't change. "You know that. Greer knows that. I know that. Whatever your legal man is telling you, that's what it is." He held Tobias's gaze. "What do you actually want?" Something moved in Tobias's face. The controlled surface of it shifting, showing what was underneath. And what was underneath was not, Emily realized, entirely calculated. There was something genuine in it. Genuine anger, genuine frustration. The particular look of a man who had spent years getting what he wanted and had encountered something he couldn't buy or file or rearrange. "I want what's fair," Tobias said. "No," Caleb said quietly. "You want what you've decided is yours. That's different. The water on this slope feeds the entire South Valley. The water on this slope is in my land grant, inclusive in my land grant." Caleb said the word precisely deliberately, and Emily saw Tobias's jaw tighten. "You know that now. So does Greer." Tobias looked at Emily. The anger in his face was redirecting. She could see it happen, see him look for the softer target. "Miss Carter," he said, "I think you understand this situation has gone further than it needed to. Whatever Caleb Morgan has told you about me, Mr. McKenna?" Her voice came out level and clear, and she didn't have to work to make it that way. "You spoke to me in the middle of the street in front of your entire town and told me I wasn't good enough to keep. That happened 3 weeks ago, and I remember every word of it." She held his gaze. "Nothing that has happened since has been caused by what Caleb Morgan told me. It's been caused by what you did." The yard was very quiet. Webb on his horse to the left was looking at the ground. Tobias looked at Emily Carter standing in the doorway of a mountain cabin, with her hands still and her chin level, and Emily saw the moment he understood that she was not going to move, that there was nothing he could offer her that was worth more than standing exactly where she was standing. He said, and his voice had changed quieter, something stripped out of it. "You have no future here. You understand that. This is not a life that—" "She already left you behind," Caleb said. "You just didn't notice." Tobias looked at him, then at Emily, then at the cabin, the yard, the mountains above them, the whole of it. His hands shifted on the reins. "This isn't over," he said. "It is," Caleb said. "The land part of it. The other parts, Greer will sort those." He held Tobias's gaze. "I'd recommend cooperating. It goes faster that way." Tobias looked at him for one final moment. Then he turned his horse. His men followed. Webb was last, and before he turned, he looked at Emily with his careful eyes, and for once there was nothing careful in them, just the plain, stripped look of a man who had reassessed something. Then he was gone too. The sound of the horses faded down the trail, and the mountain was quiet, and the summer afternoon pressed down warm and clear, and Emily stood in the doorway with her heart going faster than she was going to show anyone. Caleb set the axe against the cabin wall, looked at the trail. "It's not over," Emily said, reporting not arguing. "The legal part nearly is." He looked at her. "The rest of it, the South Road loans the other properties. Greer will need time. Tobias will find ways to slow it down." He paused. "But he can't slow down what's already on paper." Emily looked at the trail where Tobias had gone. She thought about what he'd said. "You have no future here." And she thought about the table moved against the wall, and the list she'd started, and Agnes Holt's steady eyes, and Clara Hennessy's hands flat on her knees. She thought about what a future actually looked like when you built it, instead of waiting for someone to hand it to you. "I'm not a contract," she said. She hadn't meant to say it aloud, but it came out quiet and certain more for herself than for him. "I'm not a debt." Caleb looked at her. Something in his face, that thing she'd been seeing more often, the thing under the stillness, the thing he didn't show quickly or easily, was fully present now. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. "I'm going to finish the list," she said. "For the school." "All right," he said. She went inside. Behind her, she heard him pick up the axe and go back to the woodpile, the clean sound of the work resuming steady and real in the mountain afternoon. The list grew over the following days, the way real things grow, not all at once, not dramatically, but steadily, one line at a time, each addition making the next one more possible. Emily had started with the basics. 8 children on the upper slope, ages 6 to 14. None of them in regular schooling, because the ride to Dry Creek was too long and the weather too unpredictable, and the school down there had a waiting list that favored town families first. She'd gotten the names from Agnes, who knew every family on the mountain the way a person knows the rooms of their own house, completely without effort from long habit. She'd written to the county education office in a letter that was precise and formal, and made the case for a certified teaching station in clear sequential language. She was good at that. She'd always been good at that. She just hadn't had much occasion to use it for something that was entirely her own. Caleb had moved the table without being asked one morning when she'd come in from the garden to find the main room rearranged. The furniture shifted to create a clean, open space along the east wall. He hadn't mentioned it. She hadn't made a point of it. It was simply there when she needed it, which had become, she was learning something close to his native language. The county response came in 10 days. Approved pending a formal inspection of the space and a review of her teaching credentials, which she'd included with the original letter. The certificate from the Ohio Board of Education she'd carried in the bottom of her travel bag for 3 years, with no clear idea of why she was still carrying it. Agnes read the approval letter over Emily's shoulder and said, "Well, there it is." Emily folded the letter carefully, put it with the land documents in the folder on the desk, because that was where important papers lived in this cabin now. She didn't say anything for a moment. She was afraid that if she said something, the feeling in her chest would come out wrong, too large, too visible. The kind of feeling that embarrassed her because she'd spent so long not having feelings she was allowed to show. "There it is," she agreed. Agnes looked at her. "You going to cry about it?" "No," Emily said. "It's all right if you do." "I know." She looked at the folder. I'm very glad." Agnes made the sound that was probably approval. "Good," she said. "Now let's figure out what you're going to teach them first." The first day, Greer's written findings arrived from Denver, a formal document 7 pages with the Federal Land Office seal on the cover. Caleb read it at the table, while Emily was mending the hem on her work dress and trying not to watch him too obviously. He read all 7 pages without stopping. Then, he set it down and looked at the ceiling for a moment. "Well," Emily said, "the original grant is affirmed." He looked at the document. "Spring access is confirmed as inclusive to the property. The resurvey claim is formally dismissed." He paused. Greer also opened a preliminary inquiry into the South Road loan arrangements. 4 properties named. Tobias's office has 30 days to produce documentation. Emily set down the mending. What does that mean for Clara? It means Tobias can't call that loan while the inquiry is active. Federal hold. He looked up. Robert Hennessy keeps his farm. Emily was very still for a moment. She thought about Clara Hennessy in the yard, the folder of papers under her arm, the look on her face when she'd arrived, the particular exhausted bravery of someone who'd decided to stop being afraid, even though being afraid was easier. She needs to know, Emily said. I'll ride down this afternoon. I'll come. He looked at her. It was the first time she'd said that. The first time she'd suggested going back down the mountain into the valley toward the town that had been the site of the worst morning of her life. He saw her register that he'd noticed. I'm not afraid of Dry Creek, she said. Not quite true. Mostly true. And Clara shouldn't hear this from just one person. He considered her for a moment. Then he said, All right. They rode down together. Not through town. The Hennessy farm was on the south road, 2 miles before the main street, but close enough that Emily could see the rooftops of Dry Creek in the distance, the particular shape of the buildings against the sky, the place that had been the site of everything and was now just a town she happened to know. She looked at it without flinching. That was enough for today. Clara Hennessy came to the door of the farmhouse before they'd tied the horses, as if she'd been listening for something to arrive. She looked at Caleb's face, and then at Emily's, and something in her own face opened like a window. Tell me, she said. Caleb told her. He was specific and clear, and used plain language the way he always communicated things that mattered. Clara listened with her hands pressed flat against the doorframe, and when he said, Federal hold 30 days, the loan cannot be called, she closed her eyes. When she opened them, they were wet. She didn't apologize for it. Robert, she said, turning back into the house. Robert, come out here. Robert Hennessy was a broad, weathered man who moved like someone who'd been carrying something heavy for a long time. He came to the door and looked at Caleb and looked at the document Caleb held out. The loan is frozen, Caleb said. Greer opened an inquiry. Tobias can't touch you while it's active. Robert took the document. Read it. His hands weren't quite steady. He said, How long? 30 days minimum. If the inquiry finds what Greer thinks it'll find. Caleb paused. It could be considerably longer. Long enough that Tobias may decide the legal fight isn't worth what he'd win. Robert Hennessy looked at the document for another long moment. Then he looked at his wife. Then he looked at Caleb with an expression that was complicated and raw and entirely human. I should have come to you sooner, he said. 2 years ago when he first... You didn't know me well enough, Caleb said. I should have. Maybe. Caleb didn't offer empty comfort, which Emily had come to understand was its own form of respect. You're here now. That's what works. Clara was looking at Emily. You came down, she said. I didn't expect. I wanted to tell you myself, Emily said. About the hold. She paused. And because you came up that mountain when you didn't have to. When you were afraid. She met Clara's eyes. That mattered. What you did that day mattered. Clara's jaw tightened in the way that meant she was holding something in. She reached out and took Emily's hand, briefly the grip of one woman to another, wordless and sufficient. They rode back up the mountain in the late afternoon, the sun going sideways through the trees, and Emily felt the familiar weight of the slope beneath the horse's hooves, and the familiar air that was different up here, cleaner, thinner, more present, and she thought about what it meant to belong to a place. Not own it, not be from it, just belong to it the way you belong to anything you've worked for and stayed in when staying was hard. 3 weeks after Greer's findings arrived, the county inspector came for the teaching station certification. He was a young man, younger than Emily had expected, with the bureaucratic solemnity of someone new to an official role and compensating with seriousness. He measured the room, noted the light from the east window, reviewed her credentials, asked 3 questions about curriculum and 1 about discipline, which Emily answered directly and without performance. Caleb was outside through the whole inspection splitting wood with the focused efficiency he brought to any task that didn't require him to be somewhere specific. The rhythmic sound of the axe came through the window at regular intervals. The inspector packed up his measuring tools and said, "The space is adequate. Credentials are in order." He made notes. "I'll file the certification within 2 weeks." "Thank you," Emily said. He left. She stood in the main room alone for a moment. The east wall where she'd planned the teaching space. The moved table. The window with the clear light. She went to the door. "Caleb." He set the axe down and looked at her. 2 weeks, she said. He looked at her for a moment. Then he picked the axe back up. "I'll build a shelf for the books," he said. She went back inside. She was already making the next list. Then came the morning. Everything shifted, and it came without warning, the way the truest things do. It was 5 weeks after Greer's findings. The certification had come through. 6 children had started coming to the cabin 3 mornings a week. Agnes had spread the word with the efficiency she brought to everything, and the cabin in those hours was transformed into something Emily hadn't known she was capable of creating, a space where children who'd been told learning wasn't available to them sat at the moved table and learned to read, to write, to add and subtract, to understand that the world had structure, and that structure could be known. Caleb stayed out of the cabin during school hours. He'd offered that without being asked the week before the first children arrived. "I'll work the north fence those mornings," and she'd understood it for what it was. Room. Given without conditions. On the morning it happened, the children had gone home an hour before. Emily was erasing the chalkboard she'd hung on the east wall, the one Caleb had brought back from a supply run to Dry Creek without mentioning he was going to, without any commentary when he'd carried it inside and hung it at the height she needed. And she was thinking about nothing in particular. The calm, purposeful emptiness that comes after a morning of teaching when she heard the horses. Not one horse. Not 2. Multiple horses and voices, and something in the sound of them that was different from Clara, different from Agnes, different from any visitor she'd learned to recognize in 5 weeks of living on this mountain. She went to the door. 4 men on horseback. 2 she didn't know. One was Webb, and in front of them on the gray horse, Tobias McKenna. He looked different. Emily registered it immediately. Something worn at the edges that hadn't been there before. Something in the set of his jaw that wasn't quite the controlled authority she'd seen on the day he'd stood in this yard and told Caleb it wasn't over. He was still well dressed. He was still Tobias McKenna. But he'd lost something in the past 2 months that couldn't be put back by getting dressed carefully in the morning. Caleb came around from the side of the cabin. He'd heard the horses too. He stood in the yard, not blocking the path, not positioning himself between Emily and the visitors. Just present, calm. Tobias looked at him. "Morgan." "McKenna." "I've come to tell you directly." Tobias's voice was controlled. "The inquiry Greer opened. My legal representation has advised me to provide the documentation he requested." He paused. "All of it." The yard was silent. Caleb said, "All of it. The South Road loan arrangements. The renewal documents." Tobias's jaw moved. "My representation has advised that cooperation is that it's in my interest." Emily understood what she was hearing. She understood it precisely, and she stood very still in the cabin doorway and let it settle. Tobias McKenna was standing in Caleb Morgan's yard, telling him in the careful language of a man advised by lawyers that he was going to stop fighting, that the machine, the loans, the paperwork, the alterations, the strategy of years was being handed over to federal review. Not because he'd suddenly found a conscience, because it had become less expensive than the alternative. It didn't matter why. What mattered was what it meant for Clara Hennessy and Robert and the South Road families and the spring on the eastern end of this property. "I also want to tell you," Tobias said, and now his voice changed just slightly, just enough to be heard, "that the arrangement with Miss Carter's uncle, the financial matter." He looked at Emily. "I'm withdrawing that claim." Emily looked at him directly. "Why?" He met her eyes. For the first time since the street in Dry Creek, he really looked at her, not assessing, not measuring, just looking the way you look at something you've misjudged badly enough that you're still not sure how it happened. Because it wasn't a fair arrangement, he said. The way it was constructed. No, Emily said. It wasn't. He stopped, looked at the yard, looked at Caleb. I didn't expect any of this to go this way. I know, Caleb said. He said it without cruelty, without triumph, just as a fact. Tobias looked at the cabin, at the chalkboard visible through the doorway, at the words on it, a sentence Emily had written for the youngest child that morning, large and clear. He looked at it for a moment with an expression Emily couldn't fully read. Then he turned his horse. His men followed. Webb was last, and he looked at Emily as he turned, and she saw in his face the same stripped, plain look she'd seen when he'd ridden out of this yard the first time. Not apology. Just recognition. The hoofbeats went down the trail. The mountain was quiet. Caleb stood in the yard for a moment. Then he turned and looked at Emily in the doorway. That's the first time I've ever seen Tobias McKenna say the word fair, he said. Did you believe him? He thought about it. I believe his lawyers told him cooperation was cheaper than fighting. He paused. The result's the same. Emily looked at the trail. Clara needs to know. Agnes will tell her, faster than either of us can ride. He was quiet for a moment. It's not over. The inquiry takes time. He can still make things difficult. But not the same kind of difficult. No, not the same kind. He looked at her. The land is clear. The spring is settled. The school is certified. He said each thing plainly like items on a list. You did most of that. We did most of that. He looked at her for a moment. You weren't supposed to be here, he said. You were supposed to get back on the coach on Thursday. I know. Tobias thought you would. I know. So did I, he said, quietly, honestly. When I told you to stay, I meant it, but I didn't think you would. Not past the first week. Emily looked at him. Why not? Because most people don't. He said it without self-pity, just as the plain record of experience. They come up here and the quiet gets to them, or the work gets to them, or they figure out what staying actually costs, and they decide it's not worth it. What does staying cost? She asked. He was quiet for a long moment. Being far from things that are easier, he said. Being in a place that asks more than it gives most seasons. He held her gaze. Being known by someone who doesn't talk much and works too long and fixed a broken step 2 years too late. She looked at him. The summer afternoon was enormous around them, the sky, the air, the weight of the light. The step's fixed now, she said. Yes. And the shelf is built. Yes. And the chalkboard is hung at exactly the right height. He said nothing. Caleb. She stepped off the porch, crossed the yard to where he was standing, not quickly, not with drama, just directly. I'm not here because I had nowhere else to go, not anymore. She looked at him straight on, the way she'd learned to do everything in this place, without flinching, without decoration. I'm here because this is where I want to be. Do you understand the difference? He looked at her. Something moved in his face, the thing she'd been watching for 2 months. The thing under the stillness. The thing he didn't show quickly or carelessly. It moved, and it stayed visible, and he let it. Yes, he said. I understand the difference. Good, she said. She went back to the cabin. She had lesson plans to write. September came to the mountain and changed the quality of everything, the light, the air, the sound of the wind through the pine trees, the way the evenings came earlier and held a cold that hadn't been there in August. Emily noticed all of it and said nothing because some things didn't need saying. They just needed noticing. The school was real now. 7 children, 3 mornings a week, the 8th having been added when word reached a family on the northwest ridge that there was a teacher on the north slope who didn't put children on a waiting list. Caleb had quietly widened the east wall bench to accommodate the extra seat. He hadn't mentioned it. She hadn't made a point of it. The inquiry into Tobias's loan arrangements moved at the deliberate pace of federal process, which was slower than anyone would have liked, but more certain than anything else. 2 of the South Road properties had already received formal notice that their loan documents were under review. Robert Hennessy had come up the mountain one Sunday afternoon, hat in hand, to thank Caleb in person, which he did in a few plain sentences that said more than a longer speech would have. Caleb had said, "You helped yourself. You came forward." Robert had said, "Clara came forward. I followed her." Emily had heard this through the open window and filed it away in the place where she kept things that mattered. Agnes came by twice a week, with the consistency of weather reliable, unannounced, always with something to say and something to do, and the particular gift of knowing when to leave before she'd stayed too long. She'd started bringing one of the South Slope children with her on Tuesday mornings, a girl of 9 named May, who couldn't read yet and had looked at Emily's chalkboard on her first day with the particular expression of someone encountering something they'd wanted and hadn't known how to ask for. May could read 12 words now. Emily kept a list. She checked it most evenings and added to it when she could. One afternoon in the 3rd week of September, Caleb came back from a supply run to the county seat. A longer ride 2 days the first time he'd been away since Emily had arrived, and he brought with him 3 things: the supplies he'd gone for a letter from Greer's office, and something wrapped in paper that he set on the table without comment. Emily picked up the wrapped thing, unwrapped it. It was a book. A reader, the kind used in school's 2nd level with short stories and vocabulary exercises and word lists arranged by difficulty. New, not second-hand. The kind of thing that cost more than it looked like it cost. She turned it over in her hands. "Where did you find this?" "County seat has a printer. He carries some educational materials." He was unpacking the supplies with his back to her. "I described what level you were working at. He said that one would be right." Emily looked at the book, thought about him describing to a printer in a county seat the level at which 7 children on a mountain slope were reading with enough accuracy that the printer could make a recommendation. Thought about what that required knowing, what that required paying attention to. "It's perfect," she said. He nodded, kept unpacking. "Caleb." "Thank you." He turned, looked at the book in her hands. "Don't thank me for it." She looked at him, heard the echo of the first week. "Don't thank me for it. It shouldn't have been a favor. It should have been nothing remarkable at all." And understood that he wasn't saying this was nothing remarkable. He was saying it was what you did for someone who mattered, and that things you did for people who mattered weren't favors. They were just part of the way things were. She set the book down on the shelf he'd built for the school materials. It fit perfectly. Of course it did. The letter from Greer she read while he finished the unpacking. The inquiry had expanded a 5th property on the South Road, and a question raised about a separate land transaction from 1880 that may have involved the same alteration method used on Caleb's original survey. Greer estimated the full inquiry would take another 60 days. "He's thorough," Emily said. "That's why I trusted him." "It means Tobias is contained for another 2 months at minimum." "Yes." Caleb sat down at the table. He looked tired from the ride, not exhausted, just the specific tiredness of someone who'd been moving for 2 days and was glad to stop. "It also means the pattern is documented now. Whatever Tobias does after the inquiry, the record exists." Emily looked at the letter. "He won't be able to do this again, the same way." "No, he'll adapt." He said it without bitterness. "He's not finished. He's just different than he was." "Smaller," Emily said. Caleb thought about that. "Smaller is good enough." She made supper. He sat at the table and was quiet in the comfortable way of a man who was home and didn't need to perform being home. She moved around the kitchen with the ease of someone who knew where everything was, and she did know every shelf, every tin, every drawer. The pump that needed 3 strokes, the floorboard to step over the window that stuck in summer and slid easily now in the cooling September air. After supper, she was washing the dishes when she said, "I've been thinking about writing to the county about expanding the certification to a full-term school, not just 3 mornings." He was quiet. "There are enough children," she said. "And the space could work in the shoulder seasons at least. Winter is harder, but spring and summer." "I'd need to add a room," he said. She turned. He was looking at the east wall, measuring it the way he measured everything. Not with tools, just with his eyes and his sense of what was possible. "You'd need a dedicated space," he said. "Not the main room. Something attached could be done off the east wall, add 8 feet. Give the main room back. Give the school a proper space." Emily stared at him. "You'd build a room." "I'd build a room." He said it like it was obvious. "It's not complicated construction. Take most of October work alongside the other tasks. Be done before the first hard freeze." She looked at the east wall, at the space she'd been teaching in, at the chalkboard and the shelf and the books lined up in the order she'd arranged them. "Why?" she said. He looked at her. Not confused by the question, understanding exactly what she was asking, which was not "Why would you build a room?" but "Why would you build a room for me?" "Because you're not leaving," he said, "and because it matters, what you're doing." He held her gaze. "And because I've spent 4 years building things on this mountain for practical reasons, and I'd like to build something for a different kind of reason." Emily looked at him for a long moment. "What kind of reason?" she said. He was quiet. He was the quietest man she'd ever known, and the most present. And those two things had stopped seeming like a contradiction somewhere around the 4th week. "The kind," he said slowly, "where the thing you're building is because someone should have it. Not because it's efficient or necessary or practical." He paused. "Because they should have it." Emily set down the dish she was washing, dried her hands, stood with her hands at her sides, and looked at Caleb Morgan across the kitchen of his cabin on a mountain in the Colorado Territory in September, and thought about a woman who had gotten off a stagecoach with $4 and a broken buckle and nowhere to go. That woman had stood in a street and not cried, had followed a stranger up a mountain, had read legal documents in lamplight and found the word that changed everything, had stood in a doorway and told a powerful man she was not a contract and not a debt, and had meant it with every part of herself. That woman was still her. That was the part she kept forgetting to notice. Not changed. Still her, just in the right place finally, with room enough to be fully what she was. "All right," she said. He nodded. Started to turn back to the table. "Caleb." He turned. She said, "I used to think I was unwanted. For a long time. Long enough that it started feeling like a fact instead of a feeling." He was very still. "I know it wasn't true," she said. "I know that now. But I wanted to say it out loud to someone who'd hear it correctly." She held his gaze. "You hear things correctly." He looked at her for a moment. "People who think that," he said, "usually haven't been seen properly." She held that. The precision of it. The way it landed and stayed. "I see you," he said. Quietly. Simply. The way he said everything that was true. Emily Carter stood in the kitchen of the cabin that had become her home, and felt something complete itself, not the dramatic completion of a story resolved, but the quieter, more durable completion of a person finding the ground beneath their feet and knowing finally that it would hold. "I know," she said. Outside, the September evening was settling into the mountains, the cold coming in off the high peaks, the stars beginning in the east, the pines making their sound in the wind. That was the sound of this place, that Emily knew now, the way she knew her own name. Somewhere below, Dry Creek was going about its business, smaller than it had been 6 weeks ago, a town she no longer needed to be afraid of. On the South Road, Clara Hennessy was telling her husband something, and he was listening. On the East Ridge, Agnes Holt was doing whatever Agnes did in the evenings, which Emily had never asked and didn't need to know. And in the cabin on the North Slope, the school shelf held its books in order. The chalkboard held the day's last lesson. The fixed step held firm on the porch, and two people who had both spent a long time learning the difference between being alone and being lonely, sat together in the quiet and knew without requiring any further words exactly where they were. Emily Carter had come to this mountain with nothing but the person she already was. It turned out that was the only thing she'd ever needed to bring.